Good evening and welcome to Martin's Drinks Club.
Good evening and welcome to episode 3 of Martin's Drinks Club. You are most welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Paul, your host from Word Gets Around, and Martin is waiting in the wings to make another wonderful cocktail this evening. So welcome to Martin's Drinks Club. Martin achieved his first professional drinks qualification in 1973 and has continued to keep pace with industry developments ever since. He has been a professional wine and spirit educator since 1988, past Southwest Chairman of the UK Bartenders Guild, and is passionate about all quality drinks, including craft beers and ciders. Now resident in Taunton, Martin is now keen to share his knowledge and with local enthusiasts. So throughout the show today, please feel free to ask your questions. There will be a chance to pick Martin's brain about all things drink later on, which has been very popular with the episodes so far. One thing I'd like to mention, please give your like and appreciation for the show tonight, and please follow Martin's Facebook page, which is full of loads of history and experience of the drinks trade, and a place for you to ask your questions as well about all things drinks. Now, hopefully Martin is waiting in the wings. Martin, good evening.
Hi.
Hello there, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing just great. Thanks, Paul.
Excellent. Episode 3 already. We're cracking on with the show, going through the different drinks. So, Martin, what's in store this evening?
Well, the main part of the evening is going to be a very special cocktail, and I'll just come back to that in one moment. I just want to mention a couple of things first. If you like what we do, I don't take any remuneration from this at all, but we do ask for contributions to the Taunton Food Bank. If you like what you heard and participated in, which is an extremely worthy cause, all the details are on the Facebook page, Martin's Tasting Club. You've got all the bank details, and please give the reference they know why you've donated the money from this evening. So that's number one. And the second thing is I just wanted to talk to you about ice before I go on to the main subject of the evening. Now, you heard me say before that the more ice you use in a drink, the slower it will be to dilute. It's a mistake to think that if you put more ice in, it will dilute more quickly. It's the other way around. Now, for some drinks where you are having your drink in the glass, like, for example, you might want whiskey on the rocks, the larger the cube or the larger the ice block, whatever the shape is, the longer it will last, ice cold without diluting. Now, I'm going to hold some devices up. This is something I've had for some time. You can probably see that. This is 3 spheres of ice. I bought this in a shop, but I can't remember now where I bought it. It's a long time ago. But although the principle is fine with this, what I don't like about it is the water seeps out if you're not careful in the freezer, and you get a layer of ice underneath everything, which is not a good idea. So increasingly now I'm doing away with the old ice trays I used to have, and I have trays with lids. Now, I've just bought myself a little Christmas present, but it's something that you might be very interested. This pair together was £11. Now, if you have a lot of drinks over a course of time, it does make a huge difference. That's one part of it, and I think you can see that. That's 6 very large cubes. But sometimes you don't want cubes, you want the spheres that I showed you, and they're quite fun, particularly with certain shapes of glasses. And I'll hold that up. These are the spheres that you've seen here, but the difference is it comes with a lid. So you put your lid on there, and you put that whole thing together, and there you go, you've got 6 cubes and 6 spheres. And I find that very useful. it's entirely up to you. You can get by with ice you buy from the supermarket if you've got a party. I think it's just drinks for yourself and one other person. This is obviously going to work for several drinks. So I just thought I'd mention that. It's a Christmassy thing. And at the moment, I'm going to be dropping in a few hints and tips of things you can do for Christmas. So that's my hint for this week. Now,
Excellent.
Thanks, Paul. The cocktail that we're going to make this evening is a very particular cocktail. It's called the Vespa Martini. And the Vespa Martini is well known because of the James Bond book Casino Royale, and it's also featured in the film Casino Royale. And also, you'll be very familiar with the term that Bond asked for, shaken, not stirred. Now, normally with a martini, we stir. And when we make this, in fact, any martini, the problem with shaking is that you get little flecks of ice and the drink goes a bit cloudy. And you've also got little bits of ice. So we normally shake a martini, but the one exception is the Vespa Martini, which I'll come back to. Just to mention, it was inspired by the Duke's Bar Hotel in London, and it was made by a man called Gilberto Preti, where he was at this hotel for many years, and he had a reputation for making the finest martinis. Now, Ian Fleming, as you might know, was a naval officer during the war. He was an intelligence officer where all the things for the books originated, but he was also passionate about cocktails and particularly martinis. And interestingly enough, he wanted Bond to invent a cocktail because it says in the book that this was Bond's recipe. So he asked this bartender, Preti, to make him the cocktail, but he hadn't actually tried it before he wrote about it in the book. The story is that when he actually got round to drinking this cocktail, he didn't actually like it, but it was too late.
Right.
In the film. It's just one of those stories you hear. Because what Fleming liked, he liked vodka cocktails. In fact, we made a vodka martini last week, and he was famous for asking for either a gin martini or a vodka martini. He liked both. And what happened was the bartender had taken this literally and combined the two. So it's a unique cocktail, but it's got a lot of aspects to it, which are really very interesting. So when did this come about? Well, it was 1953. We know it was 1953. That's when the film, well, actually the book came out in 53. The film Casino Royale didn't come out till some years later. It was originally made as a spoof movie, I think, with David Niven. And then much more recently, one of the very recent James Bond films was Casino Royale. And we'll show you a little clip about that. But is it a good time, Paul, if we introduce this clip?
Yeah, I think so. I think it helps set the scene for this evening. So I'll play the little clip, Martin, and then I'll leave it over to you to talk to our guest this evening.
And I'll come back and talk about the cocktail.
Brilliant. Okay, run VT.
One medium dry vodka martini, mixed like you said, sir, and not stirred.
Thank you.
Anything else, sir?
No, that's all.
Very well, sir.
A medium dry martini, lemon peel, shaken, not stirred.
Vodka?
Of course.
Just a drink. A martini, shaken, not stirred.
Tiger?
His closest friends are permitted to call him that.
Do you have any leads of your own?
Yes, I do. That's stirred, not shaken. That was right, wasn't it?
Perfect. Cheers.
Cheers.
A martini for our guest, Ellen.
A pleasure.
Shaken, not stirred.
Of course.
Campari for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
The lady'll have a Bacardi on the rocks.
For the gentleman, vodka martini, shaken, not stirred. Shaken, but not stirred. Vodka martini, shaken, not stirred.
Shall I have the vodka martini center?
Shaken, not stirred.
Miss Kennedy,
Would you get me a medium dry vodka martini?
What is
Shaken, not stirred.
Vodka martini, ke?
Shaken, not stirred.
Vodka martini. Shaken, not stirred.
James Bond. Charming, sophisticated secret agent. Shaken, but not stirred.
So you haven't lost your delicate sense of humor, Valentine, huh?
Something to drink, Miss Carver?
Mr. Bond will have a vodka martini, shaken, not stirred.
Mrs. Carver will have a tequila. Straight shot.
No, Mrs. Carver will have a glass of Mr. Carver's champagne.
Vodka martini. Shaken, not stirred.
Your drink, sir.
Lucky I asked for it shaken.
Dry martini.
Oui, monsieur.
Wait. 3 measures of Gordon's, 1 of vodka, half a measure of quina lily. Shake it over rice, and then add a thin slice of lemon peel.
Yes, sir.
You know, I'll have one of those.
So will I. Certainly. My friend, bring me one as well. Keep the fruit.
Vodka martini.
Shaken or stirred?
Do I look like I give a damn?
Can I get...
Well, am I on board? I guess I am. Right, I wasn't very clear whether it had come back to me, but there we go. Most of the time, Bond asks for the drink specifically shaken, not stirred. And I think the reason that that line went in is normally it would be stirred, not shaken. And he wants it shaken, not stirred, because I said last week, it makes the drink much colder. Now, the next thing I wanted to mention, yes, it comes out the film and the book Casino Royale. I want to talk about the recipe because the recipe is quite strange. It's very precise in some ways and a bit vague in others. He asks for Gordon's gin, 3 parts Gordon's gin by name, brand name. And this was in the book before the days when Gordon's would have been paying huge sums of subsidy. Then he asks for 3 parts Gordon's gin, 1 part vodka. He doesn't specify the vodka, but it's believed that the vodka would in those days have been Stolichnaya from Russia, but it would have been 50%. The weight of vodka to compensate for the gin. Now, in those days, Gordon's in the UK was 40%. It's not 40% today, as I told you last week. Gordon's was one of those products where the strength was reduced to 37.5 and the company just pocketed the difference. They saved a huge amount of excise duty. So no professional bartender in London would ever use Gordon's for a recipe today. The nearest equivalent that I've got is Gordon's sister company Tanqueray, which is not that dissimilar, but it's a slightly finer product and is 43%. So I've chosen to use the Tanqueray because it's more in line with the nature of the drink was. The second thing is he didn't mention the vodka. Now, very few people drink 50% vodka today. It's very hard to find. And I thought what would be really appropriate is this one, which is Russian standard, with all the Russian type themes of the Bond films in those early days, like Russia with Love. So I've got Gordon's gin, I've got Russian standard vodka, and he mentions specifically a drink called Quina Lily. Now, Lily is a very long-standing producer of vermouth, but they stopped making Quina Lily many years ago. And Quina Lily had a special ingredient which really made the drink, and that was quinine. So some people make it with the standard Lily vermouth, but it doesn't really do a lot for the drink because it's missing the essential element. He emphasized, if you remember, Quina Lily. So one vermouth which is very similar is this one. I'll put it up to the screen. It's called Americano Cocky, or Cocky Americano. It's a hard C. Now, This is a vermouth company. It's been around since 1891, so it's not exactly a new product. But there are two products on the market today that bartenders feel are very close. This is one of them. So I will be using the same proportions, but with the nearest drinks which we feel are closest in style to the recipe that was mentioned. So what's the first thing we do? Well, we're going to shake it. We're not going to stir it. So I've got my glass chilling down already. You've seen me chill down glass over the last couple of weeks. This drink needs to be ice cold, so I thought I'd chill it right at the beginning of the presentation. What did I also say last week? Well, I like to do my garnish before I make the drink, so you don't waste time for the drink to dilute more than it needs to. So the garnish for this drink is zest of lemon. So I'll do that now, because what we'll do is put a little bit of little droplets that come out of that. And as you know, I use this a peeler because what we don't want is a lot of pip. Now you notice that in the film, almost the last shot shown, where he's at the table and he's actually asking for the drink with the recipe, and you go around the table and different people say, oh, I'll have one of those. Felix Leiter says, but cut the fruit, because he doesn't want this in it. Why, I don't know, because it's a bit of balance. But anyway, that's what that character said in the film. So the first thing we do, we've chilled our glass, we've prepared our zest of lemon. I'll just give it a little trim to make it a little bit neater. And that's what we end up with. And we use that at the end to just coat the edge of the glass. Now the first thing we do, it's a very simple drink. It's got 3 ingredients. We have to use 3 parts of the gin. Now I'm going to use 60 ml of Tanqueray, and I've shown you this measure before. It's easier to use with this. The last line is the 60. We put that in our shaker. The next thing he said, 3 parts of gin, 1 part of vodka. And 1 part of vodka is 20 millilitres. That's 20 ml. You can see with this measure, the 20 ml is much easier to read than with so many drinks, where in the old style measures you had to do it by eye, and small measures were very hard to read. And then finally, 10 ml of the Cocky Americano. Now, some people use 5 ml of Lillet, and they'll use some bitters or something else to try and make up the quinine. And I think it's much better to try and replicate a very similar kind of vermouth. And all we want is 10 ml. So it's quite a dry martini. 10 ml. Got a cute yellow top. I like the packaging of this. That's very reminiscent of old-time cocktail stuff. So that's in there as well. And the next thing is we need ice. If I was on my own, just making the drink for myself, I'd probably just put my hands in the ice. But when I'm making the drink for anybody else, be they a friend or for something like this, much nicer to use the tongs. I'm very hot on hygiene. You'll notice with the television cooking programs, a lot of chefs now are much more cautious. They used to use their hands for everything. Right, okay, so nice bit of ice in there. Now, tonight I'm using the Boston shaker, just to remind you. That's another classic kind of shaker, the cobbler. And the third kind of shaker is this one, which is really a variation on the French or Parisian shaker, which is 2-piece. This is 3-piece. But I'm using the Boston shaker, which, as I said, for anybody that's starting, is the easiest to use because it's so easy to take apart. You won't get it suddenly sticking because of the room give it a little tap, make sure the seal is there, and we give it a really good shake with this one because we have to make it very, very cold. And as my bartender friend Mike has always said, you shake it to wake it. Now I know that's getting really cold because I can feel it. And with a very cold drink, you need a lot of alcohol. This is quite an alcoholic drink, and that's the reason, because we're going to dilute it. Now you're still drinking the alcohol, of course, but you won't get the burning sensation, but you're still consuming it. Right, now I'm going to hold that up to the camera. You can see that's very heavily frosted now, which is what we want. The next thing we do is we use our Hawthorne strainer, but I'm also going to use this fine strainer because of all those flecks of ice. And wow, I can see a lot of ice going in that the filter. That will certainly make it very cloudy. In fact, it's a bit cloudy anyway. That's a feature of this drink. But it's not so much the cloudiness of the liquid because I'm looking in through the top. It's purely because the glass is so frosted and looks cloudy from the top. What we're going to do, I'm just kind of holding that up so you can see. I'm going to squeeze little drops. Now you can't see them, but if you put a match to this would flare up, which we don't want to do. And the other thing is, we let out all those lovely lemony flavours. We put it round there, and that does two things. Number one, it's coating the outside of the glass so we can smell that bit of lemon as we are drinking it. And most importantly, when we taste it, we get that into lemon on the lips. But we don't put lemon in the drink in this cocktail. So that's the Vespa Martini. Absolutely ice cold. Now, it's not very sweet because we've only got 10 ml of vermouth compared to 80 ml of alcohol. But it's milder in flavour than if it was straight gin because the vodka cuts it. Now, it's much more dilute. Some people say the reason James Bond might have wanted a drink which was more dilute is he wanted to keep his head with the villains that he was talking to. But I can't really see that because you might not get the burning sensation because you've diluted it, but you're still drinking the alcohol. And if you're driving, the alcohol will be blood. So I don't really hold to that. I just wanted to say one other thing as well. And that was the final quote from the film, "Thank God the bitch is dead." The Vespa Lind, on whom the Vespa cocktail is named after, turned out to be a double agent. Bond had fallen in love with her, and he found out she'd been double crossed. So that's one of the classic lines from the film. I just love all these quotes about James Bond. So cheers. That's the Vespa Martini. This evening I'm leaving more time to talk about the things that you want to talk about. Now, in the weeks to come, I will be developing a lot more. We're only going to have one more session before Christmas. We're going to have a cocktail that I will describe right at the end of the session after the question. The very interesting group, the Martinez, by the barman, a very special barman. He's the director of mixology at the Connaught Hotel in Dundee. And they won the top bar in the top 100 bars of the world only a few weeks ago. A man called Ego Peron, who I spoke to, funny enough, about another cocktail, which I will be showing you later on in the series. But it's a very exciting cocktail. And the Martinez is much sweeter. Because when dry vermouths began to become fashionable, it began to go from the Martinez, which is sweet, to the dry martini, which is the most popular of the martinis. This is the best martini, one of the few cocktails which combines gin. So thank you very much. As I say, the before I finish, I'll tell you a bit more about the Martiniers. But now I'm open to questions. Paul.
Hi Martin, that was great. Another great cocktail. Well done. I was just quite interested to ask the first question. Obviously, the Vespa Martini is obviously synonymous with James Bond, and I wondered about the cocktails that are famous or play a part in certain movies. I wondered how the movies and how film stars, etc., have influenced cocktails, kind of, in the world, really, in your experience.
Well, that's a very good question. When we go back to this cocktail, the Vespa Martini, it was before the days where films got very hefty hidden subsidies for promoting specific drinks. But that's changed. Nowadays it's all very commercial. But if they mention Campari by name, Campari will have paid a fortune for that name to be mentioned. In the same way that every car that James Bond has driven in the films over the years, the manufacturers paid huge sums of money out for that kind of exposure. So I'm very suspicious when drinks are mentioned by name very specifically these days. But having said that, it does have a big influence. Same with wines. Merlot as a grape got a very bad press from many people because it's not the most exciting grape on its own, but it's one of the main ingredients in the top Bordeaux of the world. If you take a classic wine with Cabernet Sauvignon, it's also got Merlot in it. And Chardonnay got to the stage where so many of the people were drinking Chardonnay, people went off it. But of course, Chardonnay is the grape of the top Burgundies of the world, the top white Burgundies. So there is a lot of this, and it does influence people's perception of whether drinks are fashion or not. People don't always drink certain kinds of drink just because they like them. They drink them because it's sophistication, and yes, it is it's very critical. Yes, Paul. I'd say films have a great influence. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's excellent. I was just also thinking when you mentioned there about the reputation that comes with it, and it obviously made me think of Del Boy. It's like iconic with his trying to fit in with the yuppies, and I was talking to say Sarah, my wife, the other day about yuppies and the 80s and cocktails. We were talking about that, and I wondered if were there particular cocktails that really took off in the 80s, because it is quite synonymous with the 80s in terms of cocktails, and of course Cocktail the film with Tom Cruise. What really happened throughout the 80s really in regards to drinks?
Well, with regard to cocktails, the first point I would say is the United States was the market leader in cocktails, and there was a very good reason for this. You've got to remember, in the States it started before Prohibition. Cocktails really started going in the 19th century, and a lot of the base spirits were very rough. So what they did was they cut the spirits with something like a vermouth to mellow the drink. Then we had Prohibition. Now there was a lot of what is called bathtub gin around. It was very poorly made, often poisonous, by the way. You had to be very careful what you were drinking. I don't suppose the mafia cared so much, but it became again fashionable to make the drink more palatable by adding other things to it. But then after Prohibition, the habit was already there. So some of the great drinks, which I will be coming on to, the American drinks like the Manhattan, are classics, and I'll be talking about these drinks in due course. I think whiskey is the next cocktail base I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about how the rum cocktails came about for a completely different reason. It's really all about disguising the taste of bad drink. A bit like in cooking in France, when we went through the ages when the meat wasn't very good, they'd camouflage it with beautiful sauces. There's a lot of this that went on behind the scenes. But of course today, we haven't got that issue. The other thing I would emphasise is that London ranks amongst the top venues for cocktails in the world. Yes, there are more top-end bars across the board in the States, but the population is far bigger, particularly if you take a city like New York. London is holding its own. So once COVID is over and people start travelling back to London again, hopefully most of these wonderful bars will still be there. I'm rambling a bit. I'll go back to you, Paul.
Great. Okay. I've had a question sent to me privately, which is quite cool. Somebody joining and watching. They said, "What's in the Tom Collins?"
Very good question. Tom Collins is based on sweeter gin. It's a much older cocktail. Tom Collins came before the John Collins. John Collins is dry. And basically, when gin was first produced, and it's a great question because it follows on to the answer I gave to the previous question. If you go back to the very early days of gin, when James the Sixth of England died, and he married, or was it James the Sixth? He was James the Sixth of Scotland, that's right. So James the Second of England, he died, and he didn't have a direct heir. So William of Orange came over, and he was married to James's daughter. That was the reason why he was brought over, and that he was a Protestant. And gin had developed in Holland, and they brought this new drink over. We were at war with the French, and when William came over, that was all accelerated. This was all before Waterloo, so you couldn't buy brandy legally. So gin became very popular. I mean, I've got books on gin. I'll show you a book if I can get to it. Yes, this one. And if you want a good read, great Christmas book is this one. I don't know whether you can see it. It's called The Much Lamented Death of Madame Geneva, the 18th century gin craze. Because what had happened was, gin was very cheap to produce. And the whole country, rich and poor, was getting drunk on gin because they would drink it all the time. Because originally they said, oh, it's good for medicinal reasons. Well, in point of fact, a lot of that gin was very bad quality. People died from gin. And I don't know whether you remember the Hogarth cartoons. We had Gin Lane and Beer Alley round the corner from each other in Holborn. Now, Gin Alley, people were lying all over the place, drunk. A woman was dropping a baby over a wall. There were all these horror scenes. Whereas in Beer Alley, everything was wonderful. So there was this feeling at the time that gin was terrible quality, and it was a major scandal. And the big gin distillers weren't being taxed because the people who owned the 8 big main gin distilleries were all aristocrats in the House of Lords. So they were allowed to get away with this for years until the problem got so bad they taxed the major distilleries for the first time and control came in. And after that, quality of the gin went up. But gin was sweetened to disguise the awful flavour. Do you know they used to put arsenic in gin? Arsenic smells like almonds. They put all sorts of really horrible things in. You need to read that book. It's fascinating. That's the era when gin was not really a good drink to drink at all. But that all changed. And once they got their act together, the first thing was the gins were sweet. That taste was. Tom Collins is based on a sweeter gin. And the taste went much drier. So the product London Dry Gin became the norm. And London Dry Gin does not apply to all gins, and it does not have to be made in London. London Dry Gin is a style. But before we had London Dry Gin, we had London Gin. Might well have been sweet, probably not. So it's very hard to find the style of gin that used to make a Tom Collins, but there are gins in that. A lot of these old styles are coming back. I mean, I've got a gin here, which is called £50 gin. £50 was the cost of the drinks license. It was a fortune, 18th century. And that's the old style of gin. A lot of the Dutch gins are much closer to the early gins that we have. So that's the answer for long answer to a short question. Tom Collins dates back to the very early days of gin.
Brilliant. Good answer there, Martin. I was just thinking, obviously, this year is kind of been horrendous for the hospitality industry, in particular events, etc. And I just wondered if, in your experience, what's the closest, if there is one, kind of impact that's had on the drinks industry in your career in the drinks trade? Anything that impacted it in such a way? Was it to do with a hike in tax on drinks, or I just was interested, really, for me.
This year in particular.
Yeah, I just said, is there any particular time that in your career where there's been something that's happened like this before that's kind of really, well, it's a twofold question, really. Is there something that's happened before that'd be interesting to discuss? And also, part two, how do you see the drinks industry recovering once they are back to being open? What do you see would maybe help that to get back to some kind of,
Well, I will do my best to answer it. It's a subject that is very dear to my heart. I sent an email today to a hotel called the George Hotel in Stratford. And the George Hotel has had an unbroken history since the 1100s. It's always been an inn. It is one of my favourite hotels in the world. It's got beautiful wood panelling. It's got a modern style restaurant in the centre that they've still got, an old style English dining room where they serve roast beef of the most amazing quality. They come around with a big trolley. They have a staggeringly good wine list. It's not that it's that big, but every wine has been carefully chosen by a member of the family as a master of wine. I lived within walking distance of that place for a year when I lived in Stanford. And I used to go there for lunch because it was much cheaper to go at lunchtime. You could have a meal for £25, including these huge slabs of wonderful beef with a lovely glass of wine to go with it. So that was my great treat. But they are in a tier 3 area. They can't open at all at the moment. It's not like here where you can go into a pub and have food with your drink. You're not allowed to go inside. End of story. Now, pubs that are very old are in that position. If you talk about what's the name of our pub here in Taunton? Not my memory is terrible on that. But we have a pub in Taunton. It's a very old pub. They do food, but most people go there to drink. It's an old-fashioned pub, no music. It's just great drinks of all sorts, and spirits as well. They've got some good gins there. But these places are suffering badly, and whether they survive or not worries me intensely. Because once we lose these places, they ain't going to come back very quickly, if at all, because they've been around a long time, but they're on a knife edge. And it does bother me. I've spent most of my working life working with the hospitality industry. For many years selling to the industry, I sold quality wines and spirits. And then for over 30 years, doing training within the industry to examination standards. And it worries me intensely. And it's not just in this country. I lived 3 years in Sri Lanka. It's the same all over the world. All these places are just hanging in there. And the smaller places have usually had insufficient help from the government. The likes of Wetherspoons will survive. But whether the smaller pubs, and particularly the pubs which haven't got facilities to serve food at tables, and remember you've got to serve drinks at the table, I don't know whether they will survive. I don't know of anything in my lifetime that is as bad as this. I can't remember another. Even during the war, the pubs were, yes, war pub on down, but it wasn't a question of all the pubs in the area. This is unique in our experience. The hospitality industry, and I include restaurants as well as pubs, are going through the biggest challenge they've ever had. Don't forget, if you get an organisation like Arcadia Group, Debenhams, which have just gone into receivership, people who worked in those businesses thinking always was, well, if you can't do anything else, I can work in a pub. Can't work in a pub if there's no job for you. That, in the wider context, is a great issue. Yes, I'm very concerned. I know that answers the question. I can't remember anything like this. This is unique.
Yeah. That's obviously it's been unprecedented is the word of the year, isn't it, Martin? And they're certainly going to need our support. And like you said, really, it's kind of use it or lose it kind of thing. Obviously, we're all very social. Lots of us are social, and hopefully they need our support once we can support them. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. On a more sort of positive note, which in the next week, what kind of cocktail are we going to be looking at next week?
Well, next week I'm making the Martinez, as I mentioned earlier. What I've done so far, I've started with a gin martini because so many people recognise that's the glass. You can also make it in the coupe, the champagne saucer type glass. So I started with gin. Last week I made a vodka martini, which for my palate I found quite boring because it hasn't got the interest that gin's got. Some people like it. You can't knock other people's tastes on it. So drink. The cocktail this evening, I actually think is rather good. I've never ever tried the Cocky Americano, but I like it. That quinine, it's like adding bitters to a drink. It adds a whole new depth of flavour, and that compensates for the fact that vodka is just alcohol. Vodka hasn't got any flavour, unless you're using a lemon-flavoured vodka, yes. But the vast majority of vodkas haven't got flavour. They've got alcohol and they've got texture. They lack flavour. Gin has this multiplicity of what we call botanicals. So next week, having gone forward, because I've gone to straight martini, vodka martini, and finally this evening Vespa. So we've gone from the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. We've moved to 1951 and 1953. I'm now going back really to the 1900s to show where this came from. Now, you asked me very, very recently about the Tom Collins, which is sweeter. Now, the Martinez is sweeter. And the reason the Martinez is sweeter, it's made with red vermouth, which is sweeter, rather than dry vermouth. And it's much more like the Tom Collins that we were talking about. I mean, I just love the Martinez. There's a book that I often quote, and I've shown it to you before. It's my favourite book. I've got the Difford's Cocktail book, which has got 3,000 cocktails in it. A great reference book. But I say it time and time again, The Joy of Mixology by Gary Raven. And you can get this for under £20 on Amazon. And what I love about this book is his explanations. He hasn't got anything like the number of cocktails in it. They're different. They're different styles of book. But what he does do, he categorises every cocktail in terms of style. So what we're doing next week, is we're going back to the sweeter style of drink. Now that leads us on very neatly to when I finish with gin. I'm going to make you a couple of modern gin cocktails in the weeks that follow like that. I'm going to make you the Aviation, which is one of my favourite cocktails. I'm going to do that after Christmas, and I'll probably make one other gin cocktail. And then what I want to do, I want to move to America. I want to start looking at the difference between bourbon and rye whiskey, which are very different. It's the base product. Now, you all know about Scotch whiskey, and you've all heard of malt whiskey. And malt whiskey is made from malted barley. Bourbon is made from corn. Rye whiskey, which preceded bourbon, is made from rye. And each one of these base products, what you have to do, you have to make like a wheat beer from it, and then you've done the fermentation, you can then distill that product into the final spirit. And all these whiskies are different. And rye whiskey, although when you drink it neat, it's much harsher than a bourbon. When you start adding vermouth to it, I love the combination of flavours. And that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at how you can take one product and completely transform it into something very different. Now, whether you like it or not then depends on taste. But I have a broad taste, and that's what we're going to do. What I want to do is change the spirit after we finish the gins, and then eventually you'll get a feel for what you can do with, say, a rum. I mean, we haven't talked about any of these yet, the liqueurs. This little man here is my little monk. That was my father's. I loved this as a child. That's a corkscrew, and that's a bottle opener. And I used to like playing with this as a child. And when my parents died, my mother outlived my father by many years. My sisters were quite happy for me to take. Nobody else wanted it. But this, my little man, who I loved as a child, fits in so neatly when we start talking about the likes of Chartreuse and Benedictine, which are liqueurs which were made by monks, and we'll talk about that. The Moors, Muslims, had a great influence on the development of alcohol. They were thinking more about the medicinal purposes, but they were the ones who created the spirits. The monks then evolved this into these wonderful herbal liqueurs. Again, you've got to remember water was dangerous to drink with all the horrible things in it. So people drank alcohol because it was safer. So I'll be talking about the liqueur. We haven't mentioned liqueurs yet. I've only mentioned a little bit of orange zest. I haven't talked about drinks made with lemon juice, lime juice, grapefruit juice, orange juice. There's a vast array. I don't want to overburden you with too many things at once. But what will happen eventually is you'll get a feel for the things you like in a drink. I like the combination of different things, the sweetness, the bitterness, the sourness, the alcohol. All these things come together in a cocktail. And then you have to change that subtly to your own taste. Because you might like your drink sweeter than I do. I tend to drink dry drinks. I will be talking to you before I finish with gin and vodka about the espresso martini. And again, this is quite interesting. Here we are. This is really interesting because the classic ingredient for an espresso martini is Kahlua. It's a very old liqueur, 1937, but it's very, very sweet. And for my palate, it's too sweet. But I can't knock the fact that people love espresso martinis made with that particular liqueur. But I just bought that. That's my treat. But that comes from Australia. It's called Mr. Black. That's also a coffee liqueur. There's very little sugar in that. The coffee is what they call cold drip coffee. It takes 12 hours. There was a guy in Sri Lanka who was also Australian who used to make coffee to sell for people to drink. Made that wonderful iced coffee. It is incredibly concentrated and very, very pure because the water just drips through that coffee over 12 hours. And that is the basis of that liqueur. Radically different. Oat coffee liqueurs. You could take Tia Maria, which you've heard of, and that would be very disappointing in I think, because Tia Maria is lovely for drinking on its own. It's much more delicate, but it certainly hasn't got the power of Mr. Black. So this is what we'll be doing. Once we've got the basics out of the way, I will start to go off at particular angles to show you what else we can do with that base drink. Is that all right, Paul? Happy to.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah. Lots to look forward there, Martin. I love the story of your little man there. It's a really nice story that you've got that, and it's now with you.
Well, it was always way, but I've actually put him amongst the monks' liqueurs, which is where he should be, because monks, amazing people. You think they're very spiritual people, and they are, but they like the good things in life. They like good wine, and they like good beer. I will make a plug now. No axe to grind. If you want a really wonderful day out when we can start moving around again, is to go to Devon to Buckfast Abbey. Now, Buckfast Abbey is still a Benedictine abbey. It's a practicing abbey. You've heard probably a Buckfast wine, this tonic wine. They don't actually make it there anymore, but they used to make it in Devon. They now have it made under a franchise by a commercial organisation. If you go into their shop, they have a whole wall of beer. They have every Trappist beer that's made in Belgium and in England and other countries. It's all made by Benedictine monks, and it's a massive array. And they have a single column from floor to ceiling, which is all the different varieties of Chartreuse liqueur. But they're a Benedictine abbey, and there was no Benedictine liqueur. And I asked about this, and they said, "Oh well, they don't make it anymore. They sold off the rights." But they do that with Buckfast tonic wine, and they're bringing in Chartreuse. Chartreuse isn't made by the monks anymore; it's their formula. So why do they pick on Benedictine? They're a Benedictine abbey. I couldn't understand it. But the great liqueurs, and these are classic ones, as is Cointreau, which I will be talking about. Cointreau is used a lot. These liqueurs are serious drinks. They're quite strong. They're usually at that level of around about 40%. The green Chartreuse I've got is 55%. The Elixir is 69%. It used to be 71%. To a stupid EU regulation, if you went over 70% alcohol, all sorts of problems occur. So they dropped the strength to 69. But you only need a few drops of that. You know, you can do such wonderful things with these products. You can change. I haven't talked about bitters. I've got 3 bitters here. There are hundreds of varieties of bitters now. I use Angostura. I use Peychaud's, which comes from New Orleans. And I use Reagan's orange bitters, which again is very much an American product. And just those drops, and we're talking about, they call them dashes, it's a couple of shakes, will transform a drink completely. It's just a little bit of very concentrated liquid in a big mass of something else, and the subtlety changes immediately. You won't taste a whacking degree of bitterness. You would if you drank it immediately. But you're not doing that. You're just adding a few drops. So the contrast of sweetness, of bitterness, of acidity from the fruit, the liqueurs with these wonderful fruit flavors will completely transform the drink. And when I make the aviation, which will be just after the Christmas holidays, the aviation is made with a violet-based liqueur. It comes in violet flowers. It colours the drink. It gives it the most wonderful aroma. And it was very popular in the States until, like everything else, every bar was selling it, so it went out of fashion because it became ubiquitous. But none the worse for that. So I will be showing you initially classic cocktails, and then I will go and show you how they've evolved into modern cocktails, which you can then vary for your own enjoyment.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. There's lots to look forward to and a new place to visit once we can visit. That's on my list now, Buckfast Abbey. So thank you so much for another great show. Lots of great insight there and stories. I love the stories behind the different drinks. So thank you, Martin. We'll see you next week. I'm just going to finish up now. Thanks, Martin. So there you go. Thank you for joining us this evening. Hope you've enjoyed that. If you've got any questions for Martin, please put them onto his Facebook page. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to answer them. I think we might struggle to stump him on something because he seems to know everything about the drinks trade. So if you can think of anything to challenge him, please do ask him some good questions. Look after yourselves, and we'll see you next week, 7:30 Thursday evening. And see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.